There is a word for what the world starts doing to you in your late 60s. It is not rudeness, and it is not cruelty. It is smaller, more polite, and it costs more than either. I did it for years. I did it to my own mother. And once I understood what it was, I could not stop seeing it everywhere. Stay with me, because the third place it shows up is the place nobody expects. And it is the one that hurts the most. My name is Diane. I am 50 years old. And I have to start with a confession, because I think it's the only honest way to begin this conversation. I used to talk over old people, professionally, for years. I would walk into a room, and there would be a woman sitting in a chair, and I would make eye contact with whoever had brought her in, and I would address my questions to them, not to her, to them. I told myself I was being efficient. I told myself I was saving everybody time. What I was actually doing was treating a living, thinking adult like a piece of furniture that had an owner. I did it to my own mother. She was in her early 70s, perfectly sharp, sitting right there, and I was talking about her to the nurse in the doorway like she wasn't in the room. My mother looked at me at one point, and she didn't say anything. She didn't have to. That look is why I'm making this video. Because what I did to her, what I did to dozens of people before I finally understood what I was doing, has a name. And the name is not rudeness, exactly. It's not cruelty. The name is handling. And handling is what happens to you when the world decides, without asking, that you need to be managed rather than spoken to. Here's what almost nobody tells you about being handled. You don't always feel it coming. It starts small. The woman at the pharmacy counter who answers your question by looking at your daughter. The waiter who hands the bill to whoever looks younger. The GP's receptionist who says, slowly and brightly, as if you are 6, "And how are we today?" The word sweetheart, said by a stranger 30 years younger than you who thinks it's kind. None of these things is a disaster. Each one, on its own, is barely worth mentioning. But they accumulate. That is the point. They are not individual slights. They are a pattern, and the pattern says the same thing every single time. We have decided you don't quite need to be in charge of this conversation. We'll handle it from here. And here's what I want to say before I go any further. It is not a moral failing to find this hard. It is not self-pity. It is not being difficult. When someone talks over you for the 100th time, when someone calls you sweetheart in that particular tone, and something in you wants to push back, that is not you being oversensitive. That is your dignity working exactly as it should. Pay attention to that feeling. It is trying to tell you something now. I've spent a long time watching what separates the people who come through this decade with themselves intact from the people who get slowly filed away. And I have written it all down in a short guide called Spoken to Like an Adult. I'll tell you exactly where to find it before the end of this video. But first, the part most people miss entirely, and this is the third thing I promised you at the start. The handling doesn't just happen at the pharmacy counter. It comes home. This is the one that catches people off guard, and I think it's the hardest because it goes after your dignity from the inside, from people who love you. I knew a woman, I'll call her Eileen. She was 68, and she had a particular chair in her kitchen where she always sat to read the newspaper in the morning. One day, her son came round and sat in that chair, put his elbows on the table, and started a conversation with her husband about what the two of them thought should happen with the house. Eileen was right there, at her own table, making the tea. They were not asking her opinion. They had already formed one, and they were comparing notes. The house was too big. The stairs were a concern. Something should probably be done. And they talked about it with the careful, quiet certainty of people who have already decided the answer and are now waiting for the situation to catch up. Eileen told me about it months later. She didn't cry. She was not the crying sort. She said, "I felt like I'd already left the room and I was still standing in it. I have thought about that sentence every single day since, because this is what the world does, and it starts earlier than you think, and it is not always done by strangers. Sometimes it is done by the people who love you most, who genuinely believe they are helping, who have convinced themselves that making decisions about you is the same thing as looking after you. It is not. It is not even close. But here's what almost nobody tells you about this specific moment. The moment you feel yourself being discussed rather than included, that moment is a choice point. And the people who come through this decade with their dignity intact are the ones who treated it as one. They did not storm out of the room. They did not make a scene. They did not wait for permission to speak. They spoke. They said, in whatever words came naturally to them, some version of, I'm in the room, I'm still the person this concerns, and I would like to be part of this conversation. That is not aggression. That is not being difficult. That is an adult insisting on being spoken to like one, which is, by the way, a completely reasonable thing to insist on. The people who fade, and I have watched this, I have watched it many times, are not the ones who were spoken over the most. They are the ones who stopped correcting it. The ones who thought it's not worth the fuss. The ones who told themselves, I don't want to be a bother. And so they stopped being in the room even when they were still in the room. That is the cost. Not dramatic. Just a slow, daily subtraction. You are allowed to be a bother. That is what I want to leave you with. You are allowed to say, could you ask me that directly, please? You are allowed to say to your family, I am still here. I am still the one this affects. You are allowed to slow a conversation down when it is moving too fast for your comfort, and that is not weakness, that is authority. The ones who flourish in this decade are not the ones who made themselves easier to handle. They are the ones who refused to be handled at all, and they were not rude about it, mostly. They were just clear. That clarity is what I promised you at the start when I said the third thing was the one almost nobody sees coming. The threat to your dignity does not arrive the way you expect it to. It does not arrive as hostility. It arrives as help. It arrives as concern. It arrives wearing the face of someone who loves you and learning to name it calmly, without drama, without burning anything down. That is the whole skill. My guide, spoken to like an adult, walks through exactly this: how to stay in the room, how to keep your voice in the decisions that concern you, how to ask for help without handing yourself over entirely. It's a short read, and it's honest, and it does not treat you like furniture. The link is in the description. Grab it. It walks you through exactly how to stay in the conversation and be spoken to like the adult you still are, because you are still in the room, and it matters that you act like it.